What I want to focus on is I do want to talk about grant funding, give you some examples of some of the things that myself and my clients have used to fund it. There's a 7-step methodology that I use to get clients grant ready, and now is a perfect time to focus a little bit on your business and getting some systems, processes and strategies in place to help you be ready for grant success. I'll also have a quick chat about how to read detailed grant guidelines, which is something that a lot of people struggle to, particularly when mapping grant applications to those detailed guidelines. We'll talk about acquittal requirements and what you need to do once you've actually been successfully awarded a grant. And then I want to spend probably a good chunk of the session talking about some grants that are actually still open, some that are due to open that might be relevant. And also some various, I do want to tap into some of the stimulus packages, because I don't know about how you're all feeling, but I certainly know as an advisor that it's constant information updates on what's available, what's changed, who's offering what, and then trying to figure your way through that maze on how you actually go about accessing that. Grants will actually fund? Well, a whole range of things, and it really depends on the grant program itself. So some of the things that we have funded using it is strategic business planning, marketing plans, including digital marketing strategies. We've funded cash flows and three-way budget forecasts, business structure advice, systems and process documentation, website builds and hosting fees, integration to cloud accounting and the associated plugins so that you can run a streamlined system. I've done performance appraisal development programs, purchased some really high-end, very expensive manufacturing equipment, growth management, monthly coaching, product and service commercialization in the innovation space. There is a raft of information and a raft of different funding programs out there. And for those of you who are thinking of operating in this space, it's a great idea to make sure that you subscribe to some of the various grant finders that are out there. I use Grants Hub myself because it has all of the functionality that I need, and it's one of the more reasonably priced ones. But that's a great way to stay up to date. I know the RDA, certainly in both Moreton Bay, I'm not so sure about the Sunshine Coast. I think at the RDA level on the Sunshine Coast, they might tend to focus on some of the larger grant programs, but I do understand that they actually have their newsletters, certainly in the RDA in Moreton Bay, that actually list all of the relevant grant programs as and when they come out. So I would certainly suggest making sure that, and the majority of you probably are on the mailing lists for both the Caloundra Chamber and also the RDA. So as we all know, growth, if you're going through a growth period or a decline period like we currently are, that obviously that's going to have a profit impact and also a cash flow impact. So the budgeting process in any downturn or growth becomes critical, and planned growth is even more critical, which is why it's more important than ever that we've got that strategic business plan in place. So there's 7 steps that I like to take clients through, and I'll go through each one individually, but that is the 7 steps in how to actually get your business in the best place to actually achieve grant success. So the first one is about considering your business readiness to actually apply for a grant. I always say to clients that it's really important that as part of your planning process that you're trying to identify funding opportunities as you're going through. I have a lot of people ring me and say, hey Di, I just heard about this grant, it's just come out, what do you reckon I apply for it? And my first question is why? And I think it's the wrong way to approach grant programs. I think it's much better, and you're far more likely to get grant success if you've actually planned for that. So that means mapping those detailed action items that you need to undertake for your business to actually achieve that business goals. And once you've gone through your strategic business plan, and that means looking at where the business is now, where you want it to be, and the how part of it is your strategic plan action items. And those action items are what you try and map to relevant grant programs. And I also say, if you wouldn't proceed without a grant, don't do it, because 9 times out of 10, well not 9 times, the success rate on grant programs are very, very low. So they range anywhere between about 17 to 25% for the competitive grant programs, which are the majority of state-based programs. So, unless you have an excellent application that makes you stand out from the crowd, and unless the government is convinced that you are a viable business that is planned for the success of this grant, it makes it particularly difficult for you to actually be successful. So what I would say to all clients is that in this particular time, planning becomes even more critical. So when you're working on developing your business plans, you should be thinking about what are your current key challenges. So what are the core issues that business is currently facing? And obviously cash flow is going to be one. Then you should also be thinking about, well, what opportunities to pivot, as you said, Jeff, can this actually present to us? Is there a way that we can reframe our business model in the current environment to actually try and take advantage of those opportunities? And then we want to look at our where. So generally, in a normal environment, your where needs to be really specific. So if I want to have, a growth target of 10%, what do I need to actually achieve that? So what do my employee skill sets need to look like? How many employees am I going to need? What type of net profit level will I need to actually to maintain viability? What type of systems and processes and IT support am I going to need? What type of admin systems am I going to need? What's my product mix going to be like? What's my client mix or customer mix going to be like? What's the physical locations? What are the assets going to look like that I actually need? So it's all about being very specific about what that where looks like. And then in terms of your how, some of the critical things that we need to be looking at now in terms of surviving the next 6 months is revenue and cash flow. I mean, cash flow is king at any time, but it's even more important at the moment in terms of sustainability. Employees, how can we actually maintain employees? Do we need to maintain employees? What support is available for them? What's our supply chain looking like? What do we need to do to improve that supply chain? And also understanding the importance of stakeholder communication. So how are you communicating to your market at the moment? How are you communicating to your suppliers, to your staff? What channels are you using to do that? And having a think about, is there other markets or products or services that we can be offering to try and get us through the next 6 months? And obviously underpinning that, technology is going to be critical to the success of any business in the next 6 months. So making sure that you've got that technology functional, operational, and integrated as much as possible. So once you've done that and you've got your how and the action items identified, that becomes the foundation stone for not only the blueprint for your business success, but also the foundation on which you actually start to base your grant applications, particularly for larger grant applications, because they will always ask you for a copy of that business plan. And one of the things that I always do is, I think a lot of clients might have, when I go through, a live version of this, I always say, who's got a business plan? And, maybe 70% of people will put their hands up. Then I'll say, who's actually looked at that business plan in the last 3 months? Maybe 1 or 2 might leave their hands up, and who's actually revisiting it on a monthly basis? And usually the percentage is very, very small. And so quite often we'll find people will go through a business planning process. They'll get the 20-page template that they download somewhere, they fill it in, they send it off to the bank because they're looking for finance, they put it in the bottom drawer and they never visit it again. It's a complete waste of time and money. So the one that I do is a 1-page plan where we list our now, our where, and our how. It might end up 4 or 5 pages in some instance, but it's really concise, it's really clear, and it's revisited on a regular basis is step 1. And then we put in place KPIs to actually track the successful implementation of those. So measurement becomes critical through part of that. But first step in grant is actually doing it and then using those action items on that business plan to map to relevant grant programs. Okay, so when you're looking at grant programs, most grants have two types of eligibility requirements. So they will have an entity or business eligibility requirement, and then they will have the type of project that it will fund. So the first thing that you need to do is actually look at the detailed guidelines. So one of the things that I emailed to you yesterday was a set of detailed guidelines for a very small grant program, which is the Small Business Digital Grant. Now, the reason that I sent the guidelines for that, and one of the reasons I decided to actually focus a little bit on reading these guidelines, is that it is one of the few state grants that will be reopening this year. It's scheduled to be reopened in May. And when I looked at the attendance list for today, and I know a lot of people haven't actually come through, but when I looked at the attendance list, it was also one of the few grants that would actually be applicable to the majority of businesses, whether you are a not-for-profit or whether you are actually a commercial entity. So this particular grant, if you've got the guidelines with you, if you have a look at the eligibility criteria on page 2, it actually talks about what the business or entity actually needs to be. So the entity itself needs to have simply an active ABN, be registered for GST, have less than 20 employees, be based in Queensland, and have a turnover of less than 2 million in the last financial year, which was 2019. If you've previously had grant success under this program, you can't reapply, and that's very typical of any grant program. The majority of cases, you're locked out of that program for 5 years once you've had some success, and that's regardless of whether you are awarded the full amount of the funding or whether you're only partially funded, and I'll explain more about that in a minute. So that's the first criteria for this particular grant, but any grant, the first step that you need to do is download the detailed guidelines and tick off that the entity or the business itself is actually eligible, because a lot of grant programs, there are certain structures that can only apply for those particular grants. Some require you to be set up as a company or a trust with an incorporated trustee. Some are for sole traders. Some require a business to be, or quite a few of the all larger grant programs require a business to have been trading for 3 years or more to be able to access. But this one is a really simple one. It is applicable to the majority of businesses or not-for-profits. So the second thing that you need to look at is what type of projects will it actually fund? And this is where it's important that you look at your action plan as part of your strategic plan. So what digital projects did you actually identify that you need to undertake to get your business to that next level? And then you try and map them to these relevant areas. So if you have a look at page 1 on this particular criteria set, it talks about it will fund 4 specific priority areas. So receiving payments or selling them online, digital planning, digital marketing strategy development, and digital training. And we did have a few marketing specialists that were going to join us. So this one would actually be a boon for you guys, that, you know, if you're looking at a way to market yourself in the current environment, this is a great marketing initiative for anyone in that digital marketing space, because it's a way that clients can actually pay you to use your services and get 50% of it funded by the government. So if you are in that marketing space, or even in your systems space, Bruce, I'm sure that there's some things that you can think of in relation to this that would fit. Specialised digital technology and business-specific software will also be funded, and we've also managed to fund things such as, you know, Xero integrations and all that sort of stuff to change platforms for accounting software, etc. It'll also fund content development, so web pages, mobile apps, new websites, that sort of thing. And if you're setting up a new website under this, it will also fund the first 12 months of the hosting fee. So it is a great program, and I can't specify enough or state enough how important it is that we've got our technology systems in place for the next 6 months. So we'll scrap the worksheet. So my practical tip number 1 was about making sure that you've got that strategic plan done and ready to submit for grant applications. Practical tip number 2 is making sure that you review those detailed application guidelines. And first step, make sure the business itself is eligible. And then secondly, have a think about the projects on your strategic plan and try and map them to the relevant grant priority areas. And the practical tip number 3, quite often in grant guidelines, particularly in the larger programs. So this one's a really small program. This particular grant is a $10,000 grant. And the majority of grants are co-contributions required. So that means if a grant program is for $10,000, the government will fund $10,000 of a $20,000 project. So the project itself can be up to $20,000. They will give you $10,000 towards it. So because this is a smaller funding program, so it's only $10,000, the guidelines aren't very complicated. So we're looking at about, I don't know how many pages we've got here, 9 pages or so of detailed guidelines. As you can imagine, when you're looking at the larger grant programs, such as the Made in Queensland, Accelerating Commercialisation, or a recent one that we've had success in, which is the Resource Recovering Industry Development Program, that's up to $2.5 million, you're looking at 50, 60, hundreds of pages in some instances. So you always have to go through the detail to make sure you understand it. Sorry? The other thing that I would say is just make sure that you read the details of what won't be funded, because quite often, even if they'll list eligible projects and eligible expenses, but they will also list what expressly won't be funded. So the other thing that I just want to say for step 3 is most grants are allocated on a competitive basis, unfortunately. So that means even if you meet those 2 criteria, it doesn't automatically mean that you're going to be accessed that grant. And the core objective of any grant, if you think about it, grants are political beasts. So they're focusing on government in power at that particular time, priority areas. So one of the ways I always try and find out what grants might be coming up is have a look at the budgets. So both the federal and state governments will announce their funding priority areas when they release their budgets each year. But at the core of every grant, it's jobs and growth. So when you're completing your application, it's really important that you map that project to the relevant core objectives or criteria that are listed. So on page 3 of this particular program, it talks about how you will be assessed, and that comes down to the impact that particular project's going to have on the business. So in this case, and in pretty much every case, it's measured by revenue growth and employment outcomes, both full-time and indirect employment as well. So it also looks at the extent that it will make a business more competitive and value for money. So this one is a simple set of criteria, but make sure when you're completing your application that you are directly mapping the detail in that application to the relevant grant criteria. The other thing that you need to understand is what you need to submit. And it's amazing to me, I've had people say to me, oh, I've done my grant application, I did it myself, and then I forgot to submit one of the quotes. It's too late, you get one go. All of the grants require electronic submission. And if you fail to submit something, you don't get an opportunity to resubmit. So you automatically put yourself out of the running straight away. So make sure that you're familiar with what it actually needs to include. So sometimes you will find in your applications you will need quotes, and you might have to provide up to 3 quotes. You'll need employee head counts. You will always be required to either confirm or, for larger programs, provide evidence of how your business is going to meet its match funding contribution. So that's, in this situation, they'll give you $10,000 towards a $20,000 project. How are you going to fund this particular, your core of that project? So how are you going to fund your share? Just be mindful when you're submitting quotes, because it's really important that the proposal or the quote that you submit to support your application is also mapped to the criteria. And sometimes they'll require a breakdown of eligible and ineligible costs, particularly if you're doing larger projects. They'll require a breakdown of costs and hours. They require information and experience on the people that are actually performing that particular work. And quite often for larger grant programs, they'll also require some benchmarking, financial projections and cash flows. They will definitely ask you for a copy of your business plan, growth strategies, depending on the type of grant you're looking for, and also financial statements. Sometimes it can be just your current year financial statements, but in the larger programs, it's usually up to 3 years worth of financial statements. And in the majority of cases, they are also requesting accountant compiled financial statements. So that doesn't mean audited statements. It simply means a set of financial statements that has an accountant compilation report attached. So you need to make sure that you have access and you are submitting all of the relevant documentation for that particular program. So for the Small Business Digital Grant, it's quite simple. You need a quote plus an outline of how that digital technology or service will enhance your capabilities and your competitiveness, plus the impact. So that means estimated revenue growth, estimated cost savings, estimated time savings, and employment growth. So you've actually got to say this will give X number of jobs, X number of indirect jobs, etc. And confirmation again of your financial contributions. So my next tip number 5, is to check the devil in the details. So make sure that you are addressing all of the relevant criteria, that you're submitting all the required documentation, and that the supplier of the services that you're actually using is aware of what you're actually applying for, so that they can make sure their proposal or quote is also mapped to that relevant grant criteria. And finally, number 6, which unfortunately I have seen happen multiple times, is always check when you're uploading, before you hit that submit button, that you have uploaded all of the relevant supporting documentation. In larger programs in particular, where you are uploading, 30, 40, 50 documents or more, make sure that they're all submitted at the same time. And don't leave it to the last minute, because what you find is through the portals, that last couple of hours, the portals get really busy through both the state and federal government systems, and we have had instances where they have crashed and you haven't been able to submit the application and they've still refused to accept it. So don't leave it to the last 2 hours before the submission deadline, which is generally 5 o'clock, to start uploading and submitting, particularly for larger programs. I can't stress that enough. Okay. So the next thing, and this is why I say prepare, why I say do those strategic business plans and map before the programs come out, because most grant programs are only open for a maximum of 28 days, particularly the business type grant programs. So it's a very short time frame. Particularly if you're looking at a larger program, the application process and the documentation you need to submit is quite onerous, and sometimes you might actually not, even if you're on the government mailing list, you actually may not find out that grant's actually open until a week before, it might be open a week before you even find out about it. So that reduces your timeline by 2 or 3 weeks. So you need to be ready and be mindful that the government has the right to move the goalposts, excuse me, which I have seen happen in several larger grant fund programs. So what that means is between stage 1 and stage 2, they might decide that they need further information on your detailed submission. So quite often the larger grant programs will have multi-stage application processes. So stage 1 is where you submit an EOI. And I've had clients fall down in this before, where they thought, oh, it's just an EOI, I'm just going to express my interest without, going into enough detail about mapping to the criteria, making sure the project is in a priority area, and they miss out when really a little bit more of an investment in time at that EOI stage could have got them through to successful stage 2, which is still competitive. But the point that I want to make is make sure that you've got everything ready before the programs come out. Check your funding potential. So make sure you're trying to maximize any program that's available or any costs that you can include in that particular project. So in a lot of instances, the project will also, or the grant will also fund things such as training, installation or implementation costs. So So make sure that when you're putting your grant budget together for your particular project, which you will be required to submit, that you're actually including all of those supporting activities in those programs. And the other thing that I say to clients is try and leverage from one grant program into another. And by this I mean, and I'll give you an example. So one of the programs that I use for clients in the manufacturing or agribusiness space is a fantastic federal government program, and I'll talk about it later in the session. And the reason I use that program a lot is it's one of the very few grant programs that is not competitive. So if you meet the eligibility criteria, you can automatically access that program. So what I do is I try and put clients in those particular industries that fit that criteria through this particular funding program. It's a $20,000 grant program. And as part of that program, you will actually be allocated a federal government advisor that does a free business evaluation and business review on your business. So we work closely with a number of those different federal government advisors. And as part of the process of guiding my clients through it, I always work closely with the advisor and suggest things that I would like them to include in their report. And 9 times out of 10, those things will be mapped already on our client's strategic business plan. So I've got one large manufacturer in particular that we went through a strategic business planning process. We identified that they were getting smashed by cheaper Chinese imported goods. Their cost of energy was going through the roof, and their machinery was starting to age. So we looked as part of that planning process, well, what can we do differently? What type of products should we be moving towards? Where's the market heading? And we identified a bit of a gap in the market in relation to bespoke commercial kitchen equipment. And what we wanted to do is we wanted to upgrade our factory facilities to be able to capitalize on that opportunity and make bespoke equipment that required some 3D design and integrated smart factory status. So we looked around at what was actually available to help us achieve that goal. And we found this particular piece of equipment. The only problem was it was worth $1.8 million plus. And it was located in Germany. So then we said, well, okay, we can't afford that. What other options have we got? So then I found, I'd put them through the Entrepreneurs Program, this particular federal government program. And we worked with the advisor who also agreed that that was a great idea. So they actually put in their report that they recommended they apply for the Made in Queensland report grant fund program. So we had a federal government program referring us for funding to a state-funded program. So just by submitting that report, we were already ahead of the pack because we'd actually been referred into that program. So that's what I mean by leveraging from one program into another. And we were successful in the Made in Queensland grant as well. So we then got $900,000, which was a 50% co-contribution towards the installation of that particular piece of equipment. So most grant programs require cash co-contributions, usually a 50% co-contribution, but it can be as much as 75%. And it's interesting. So for instance, in the Made in Queensland program, you have to be really careful how you fund your 50% co-contribution, particularly where you're working in grant programs that are to fund nuts and bolts, so physical assets. Usually, but not always, the government will not allow you to have a charge against that particular asset that they are part funding. So that rules out use of chattel mortgages or leases or any funding agreement with a bank where the bank requires security over that particular asset. So you need to be mindful of how you're going to structure your funding agreements to get around this. In our situation, we had related entities. So we borrowed funds in the related entity on lender to the trading entity. So we managed to get around it. But one of the things that is critical in the grant space is you need to understand with your business the impact of your cash flow, because your cash outflows will not be matched by the government grant inflows. So if you get a grant, let's say it's for a $20,000 grant, they don't give you the $20,000 up front for you to then go and fund your 50%. The way it works is they might give you, let's say in that $20,000 example, the project has to be worth $40,000. So you have to actually get approval for the project, be awarded the grant, then your cash flow actually has to fund that project. So you've got to pay the full 40,000 before you get 20,000 back. And I think that's a step that a lot of clients miss, that you don't get the grant funds up front. For the larger grant programs, such as Made in Queensland, Accelerating Commercialisation, or any of the other larger programs, they will part fund at various stages. So you will get a percentage on signing, usually a small amount, maybe 10%, when you sign the funding agreement. Then you will get a percentage of the funds at different milestones throughout the relevant project. And for the larger programs, they even withhold the final 5% of the grant funding until you've prepared a post-completion report, which can be up to 12 months after the funding project's actually finished. So just be mindful that you have the cash flow in your business to fund those larger grant programs, and you can ride out the cash flow impact while waiting for those government grant installments to come in. So always make sure that you identify and monitor the impact of the project on your cash flow. And that's why for any large grant program, they will require you to submit detailed cash flows. So my final step, make sure that as a business owner, you're working with advisors to develop that strategic business plan, to identify your relevant grant programs and map to the business plan, to help you with the supporting documentation, such as your cash flows, your forecasts, your benchmarking, your growth strategies, all of those sort of things, your bank. And if you do it right, you can actually have a lot of success in this space. So let's assume that you've got your grant. This is where a lot of clients forget that doesn't mean it's the end of it. So once you get a successfully awarded a grant, you will receive a government funding agreement. It's really important that you check that funding agreement to check for any variations that might have gone out in that particular program between when the detailed guidelines were released and what they've actually agreed on for the funding. Check confidentiality clauses. So in a lot of cases, you actually can't publish certain things in relation to that project. Check the payment schedule. That's critical in terms of making sure you're happy with it. So you do get an opportunity to actually revisit that payment schedule and go back to the government and say, no, for my cash flow, I needed the payment milestones to be set on these particular dates. And 9 times out of 10, they will agree with them. But it's important that you're proactive in doing that before you actually sign that funding agreement. And then finally, check the acquittal requirements. Because for the larger programs, every grant program has an acquittal requirement, whether that's a smaller report or a small form you have to complete with submission of your tax invoice and proof of payment, as in the Small Business Digital, or whether it's a larger funding program, there is always acquittal requirements. For the larger funding programs, there will be progress payment reports required at each milestone throughout that particular project. There will be a final report required to be submitted. There will be a 12-month post-completion report, and in some instances, there will also be independent audit reports. And if you think about it from the government perspective, I mean, they're giving you public funds. So they need to make sure that, one, you're in a situation to make this project a success, which is why they require co-contributions, because you're more likely to be committed to a project if you've got some skin in the game. And 2, that they can see clearly that you have correctly spent those funds as agreed. So from a government perspective, there is reporting requirements that go with grants, which can be quite onerous for those larger grant programs. So now I just want to talk about what grants are actually available. So grants come at 4 different levels. So the ones I'm going to focus on today are the government type grants. So federal government, state government and local government grant programs. There are also private commercial grants through most of the banks have grants, Google has grants, Coles, Woolies have grants. Generally, the private organisation grants tend to be for not-for-profit organisations. So this is the program that I would like anybody who is eligible to apply for. It is a fantastic federal government program. It is a $20,000 grant funding program. So that means a $40,000 project. So for a $20,000 grant. And there's 4 different arms within this project. I've worked with clients on the accelerating commercialisation arm of it, which is for startups and innovators who have a very innovative product that they need to commercialise. And you can apply for up to $1 million to assist you to do that. So we're working in that space a lot. I've had a lot of success in the business management side of things. And the business management side of things is the business growth grant that if you meet the eligibility criteria and you go through the process correctly, you can automatically access that $20,000. So it is the only funding program that I know of that's not competitive. There's a number of other support packages under this program. Incubator support is where they will provide you with a researcher that comes in-house to assist you to commercialise products or explore new markets. And the Innovation Connections is predominantly for research institutions such as universities, hospitals, that sort of thing. So this is the federal government's entrepreneurs program. So, excuse me, I don't have coronavirus, I've just been talking a lot. So to be eligible for this particular one, you need to have been trading for 3 years. Your turnover needs to be above 1.5 million and less than 100 million. You have to be operating through a company structure or a trust with a corporate trustee. And finally, you have to be operating within one of these identified growth industries. So they call it manufacturing, but it's basically manufacturing. So if you're a manufacturer, if you're a food or agribusiness, meditech and pharmaceuticals, mining, equipment, technology and services, oil, gas and energy, or a tourism business in North Australia, excuse me. Honestly, it's the only time I've coughed all day. So, if your business is in one of those industries, sorry, or if you are in the supply chain to one of those industries, so by that simply means that more than 35% of your turnover needs to come from one of these industries, you can access this program. And it's a fantastic program. It won't fund nuts and bolts, but it will fund things like cash flows, strategic planning, systems advice, systems integration, business mentoring, business coaching, performance appraisal plans, training needs analysis, a whole heap of different things that you need to embed capability and capacity in your particular business. So it's a great program. Manufacturing Modernisation Fund is another program that is a federal program. It's currently closed with potential. I'll be very surprised if they don't reopen this one at the end of the year, given what we're currently dealing with to try and support manufacturers. Queensland state government funding. At the moment, the majority of funding programs for the state government are closed, pending release of the new small business strategy. I phoned again this morning to see when we could expect to see that being released. All I can be told is everything's up in the air at the moment because their priority is the coronavirus support packages. It was originally to be released around the same time as the state government budget, which was originally going to be brought forward this year, but again, that's now been pushed back. So all I can say is watch the space when the government does release that budget, because it will also have the small business strategy, which contains all of the grant details. Ignite Ideas is for commercialising particular products or services. Again, it was due to reopen this month. It's also been put on hold. The state government has a business development fund, which again is to fund startups and commercialisations. I've had a look at that particular program with various clients, and my thinking is that you are much better off actually applying if you're trying to commercialise a project through the federal government accelerating commercialisation program, because the state one actually requires you to give away equity in that particular entity, and most people don't want to do that. So the accelerating commercialisation one might be a better option. One of the other things that is a really good free program is the IPAM program. It is a free program that's available to Queensland businesses to assist them reduce workplace injuries and accidents. Now, when I first started talking to clients about this, I did get a lot of pushback saying, well, why would we want to go through that program? Because if they find anything, they'll report us. It actually doesn't work like that. It's actually a separate arm of the Queensland government. And the only time there is any... Sorry? I don't think they're talking to me. The only thing that I would say is that the only time they have to report is when they come across something that places employees at risk of serious injury or death, and the employer doesn't do anything to address that issue. So it's a great program. They will even give you templates and resources to help you build your workplace health and safety systems. I'm going to scrap the next one because it's only relevant to... Does anybody have staff in Moreton Bay? No. Okay, we'll scrap that one. Does anybody here export? Luke, are you considered export? No, you probably wouldn't. Jeff, somebody here was export, or was that one of the attendees that didn't come? I think it might have been one of the attendees that didn't come. But if you're considering exporting, there is a great program available at the moment that's open until 29th of May to help get the business ready to export. You work through that with Trade and Investment Queensland. It's a fantastic program for those of you who haven't started exporting, but are considering it as part of a change to your business model with what's happening at the moment. The Export Market Development Grant, there was a federal government announcement yesterday that is expanding that scheme. They're going to put an extra nearly 50 million into that scheme. It is to fund people that are already exporting, provided they have eligible export expenditure over $15,000. And that grant funding program's up to about $150,000. So I've put quite a few of our export clients through that. It is a great program. The only thing that I will say is if you are in the export space, your documentation is critical to making sure that you have it correct. Because in some situations for this particular grant, you actually have to submit quite a lot of supporting documentation. So the good thing about this program, in some instances, clients, particularly smaller clients, may not actually hit that $15,000 threshold in their first year. But in your first year application, you can actually combine 2 years worth of eligible expenditure to actually achieve that. You are eligible for up to 8 grants. So this is similar to, it's called a grant, but it's actually more like a tax incentive. It's actually fully legislated. So is anybody familiar with the Research and Development Tax Initiative? Yep, some of you are nodding. Okay, great. It's very similar to that. So it's actually a legislation-based grant. And if you spend the money, you automatically can access it back, provided you've got your submission required, right? So it is a fantastic program for people that are in the export space. It will reopen. It opens every year at 1st of July and closes the same time every year, which is around that 30th of November time period. So I can't stress enough the importance of getting ready, getting your documentation ready for this. And there's also been a lot of announcements yesterday in relation to the relaxation of some of the testing requirements that accompany those applications, and also a relaxation around some of the expenditure requirements as well. So that's something to be mindful of. For those of you who have had dealings or have loans with EFIC, which is now known as Export Finance Australia, there's also relaxation of payment arrangements that have been announced yesterday around those loans. We don't have any females here at the moment. We have some maybe coming later. There's a Female Founders Grant, which is a fantastic grant that has just opened. It is open until 14th of April 2020 to help support startups that are majority women-owned or women-led. Great program, that one. For those of you who are in the tourism industry, and we did have a few that haven't logged on, the Queensland destination events are now open. So that is a great destination. So Tier 1 destination events funding is a fantastic program used to support Sunshine Coast tourism organisations that are looking to fund particular milestone events. The only requirement for that one is that you actually have to have run the event previously. So it has to be at least the second year to be eligible for this particular grant. because you need to prove, attendee numbers, a lot of different things to be able to apply. The tier 2, which is the higher level of funding, you actually need to be invited to that particular grant funding program by TEQ, which is Tourism Events Queensland. So they are open. We were having some not-for-profits log on. There's some great Sunshine Coast Council grants that are available for not-for-profits. I'm not going to go through those at the moment, but be mindful that the details in here, it's also on the Sunshine Coast Council website. Also for not-for-profits, Gambling Community Benefit Fund is now open. It is a fantastic program, really easy to apply for, up to $35,000. And Google Ad Grants is also worth having a look at to see if you might consider applying. Great dollars to support you. And also through Google Ads, you can have a link to look at the YouTube not-for-profit support program as well. So there's some opportunities there for not-for-profits. So does anybody have any questions on what we've spoken about so far? No? Okay. I just want to take a moment and just have a recap, because I've been asked a lot in the last couple of weeks about the coronavirus stimulus packages. So information is coming thick and fast from all levels of government. We're having regular federal government, state government, local government announcements in relation to what support is available. So I'm only going to focus on the big ticket items for businesses in the next 5 minutes. Because the individuals, we just don't have enough time to go through all the details of what's applicable for individuals. But the first thing that I would say is there's 4 key priority areas from the federal government's perspective. The first one is in relation to trying to stimulate the economy by encouraging people to continue to spend, which is really interesting because the majority of clients I speak to, the last thing they're in a situation to do is actually spend a lot. However, if you are lucky enough to have enough cash flow to tide you out for the next 3 to 6 months, and you are considering purchasing an asset, it's a great opportunity for you to get a full tax write-off on that asset if it's a $150,000 depreciable asset that is purchased and installed between 12th of March and the 30th of June 2020. So that's gone up considerably. It was previously $30,000. It's now $150,000 for that instant asset write-off. There's also some accelerated depreciation deductions that are now up to 50% for assets over that threshold that are purchased and installed between the 12th of March 2020 or 30th of June 2021. And I'll be very surprised if we don't get to June and they announce a further extension of that instant asset write-off. However, at the moment, it is only until the 30th of June 2020. The other thing for clients with turnover of less than 500 million is the effect of that instant asset write-off basically means that when your general small business pool, the low general pool balances come under that 150,000, you can then write all those off as well. So there will be some tax savings for clients in that particular space when you lodge your tax returns. The second pillar of the federal government announcement was around the cash flow support. And I was talking to Luke before everyone else joined about the frustrations that clients are having at the moment in terms of there's all these announcements, but from a business perspective, there's no actual cash coming through. And this is an example of that, unfortunately. So this was first announced by the Morrison government as a cash grant, and it's actually not. What it is a pay-as-you-go withholding credit. And then the phase 2, so originally they announced that up to 25,000 on first tranche with a maximum of 50. Now they've gone up to 50 on the first tranche, 100,000 on the second tranche. And it will be automatically triggered on lodgement of your March BAS to get into that program. So it's a really critical time that small businesses need to be talking to their accountants about what's going to happen with their March BAS, because that's when you need to be triggering these various things. The practical application of it, though, as Luke and I were discussing earlier, is that it was marketed as a cash grab, but it's actually for the majority of clients not going to result in a cash refund. What will happen is that the practical application of it means that those pay-as-you-go withholding credits will probably be applied against the other liabilities on that same BAS. So whilst it, for the majority of clients, may not generate a cash refund, it will reduce the net amount that you actually have to pay. So it will save you cash, but it may not always result in a cash refund. In the majority of cases, I would say it wouldn't. So that's why it's really important that for every individual business, you're talking to your accountants about how that will actually apply to you. So it's applicable to both quarterly and monthly lodges. And it's based on the pay-as-you-go withholding credits of wages between 1st of January 2020 and 30th of June 2020 for employers that you have registered as at 12th of March 2020. Employees, I should say. So that's the first arm. The second arm is the wage subsidies paid to apprentices. So if you've got a registered apprentice as at 1st of March and you've got less than 20 full-time employees, there is a 50% wage subsidy available up to about $21,000, payable at $7,000 a quarter. Applications opened today. Now, before we logged on, I was trying to find the link to the applications, but you actually have to go through your apprenticeship support network provider. So most people who have apprentices will be already in that network. Otherwise, log into australianapprentices.com.au, I think it's called, and they can direct you. Now, this is the other one, the big announcement in the last week, the JobKeeper payments. So if your turnover is less than $1 billion, and you can demonstrate that your turnover has decreased by over 30% relative to a comparable period last year, you can access support of up to $1,500 per fortnight, regardless of whether your employees are full-time, part-time, or classified as long-term casuals. That is, those that have been with you more than 12 months, and you've got to be over 16. I've had a lot of clients say to me, this is all well and good, Di, but it's not going to pay until May. Unfortunately, that's the case. So be mindful that the detail has not been released around this yet. What they're asking is for employers who think they might be able to access it to register via the ATO, and that is the link to the registration on that particular PowerPoint. The other thing that I'm having clients say is, well, Di, that's great, but you know, our March turnover this year compared to our March turnover last year hasn't shown that 30% drop, but we know it will for April. So that simply means that maybe you can't apply, you know, once it's not even open yet, but when it does open, you don't apply for March, but you can certainly apply for April onwards. So it'll be a 6-month payment, with that first payment not being made until May. And the good thing about this one is people that are self-employed, sole traders, can also access this, and my understanding is partnerships as well can access this particular one. So one other thing to bear in mind is that where you register your employees for this particular payment, they can't double dip. So if they're also getting the COVID supplement, the $550 coronavirus supplement that was announced, they need to declare the income because it might impact on what that supplement amount actually is. So just be mindful that if you are registering for this and you're nominating your employees, that you are telling your employees, because they will be obligated to notify Centrelink because it might impact their coronavirus supplement that they're receiving. There's a lot of support in relation to ATO support at the moment. So they're offering deferred payment arrangements for those of you who are struggling cash flow wise. From a Queensland basis, we've got deferrals and potential refunds for payroll tax that are being offered. There's instalment variations, and there's interest and penalty remittances. So again, you need to be talking to your accountant about what you may or may not need to access from an ATO support perspective. The other thing from a general business perspective to remember is that the solvency safety net is now increasing. So it's gone up from 2,000 to 20,000, and an increase in time to respond to potential statutory demands that may have been issued on you. So previously that was 21 days. It's now up to 6 months. So that's something else to bear in mind. A couple of really good funding arrangements have come out. And again, we don't have a lot of detail on the practical application, but what I can tell you is that there's 2 funding arrangements, one's state, one's federal, and you can't access both. So you have to look at both of these programs and work out which one is going to be the most appropriate for your particular business. So the first one is the Queensland State Government Loan Support Package. So this is a great package because the interest rate's only 2.5%. I had a chat to a client yesterday who was saying that the federal government one, because it's issued through providers, could potentially be a 4% interest rate. So just be mindful of that. So with this Queensland state government loan, the loan amount that you can be eligible for is only up to 50% of your eligible annual wage expense. So it does include super, it does include owner's drawings if you're not actually paying yourself a wage. So that's the first thing that you need to be talking to your accountant about to work out, well, how much can I actually get under this? Can I get the full 250,000? Because in some instances, you might only be able to access part of that 250,000. The great thing about it is interest and repayment free for the first 12 months, followed by 2.5% interest rate. However, you have to have been trading since 1 July 2017 and be considered viable in normal conditions, normal business conditions. So for anybody that's only, in the first 1 or 2 years of trading, unfortunately, that's going to rule you out of that particular loan support packages. It will be an unsecured loan for if you're taking less than 100,000. If you're going to ask for a facility up to the full 250, anything between that 100 and 250,000 limit will be required to be secured. And my understanding is it is a charge against general business assets. So that's the first loan. The second loan is the federal government SME support guarantee scheme. So basically what's happening here is the government is guaranteeing financial institutions, so the banks, 50% guarantee for unsecured loans up to 250,000. It's a 3-year loan with initial 6-month repayment holiday. And to access those, you actually have to contact the banks directly. Now, most major banks are offering these. So if you think that particular loan scheme might be better for you than the Queensland government loan scheme, you need to be talking to your banks directly about that particular one. The Queensland government loan support is open. You can start applying for it now, but be mindful that even though it's an unsecured loan, the application requirements supporting documentation can be quite onerous. So again, I can't stress enough that you need to be talking to your accountants about that particular loan package if you're considering it. For those of you who work with clients that are or if you're in the agriculture, fishery and forestry industries, there's also air freight support that's currently available. So the government wants to try and keep our markets open as much as possible for seafood, premium red meat, dairy, horticulture exporters and that sort of thing. So they will fund your air freight to a certain percentage. And then on the return flight, the way it's supposed to work is on the return flights, they'll be filling it with critical equipment, medicine, etc., that we need to get through the next 6 months. So again, it was only recently announced. There is no legislation around this yet. If you are in one of those industries and you want funding for your freight, you need to go and register through that particular link that I've put up there. And finally, if you're a manufacturer or if you have clients who are manufacturers in your supply chain, it's really important. At the moment, the government is looking to maximise opportunities for manufacturers. So what we're doing is we're asking people who think that they might have, what the Advanced Manufacturing Growth Centre is doing is asking anybody that as a manufacturer, a component supplier, has a skill in design, engineering or manufacturing expertise to register their interest through this particular link to access government supply chains and potential tenders down the track. So that's a great initiative. It doesn't cost you anything, takes 5 minutes to register, really simple to register. All right, there is so much information out there in relation to these various stimulus packages. We've actually put a dedicated support, resource support in place on our website. So I've given you a link to the SRJ resources section on our website. We summarise them all in easy to read language and try and give you examples of the way the legislation may work, I should say, because not all the legislation is available. And the other place to go and have a look is treasury.gov.au. They have a whole page with links to fact sheets on coronavirus supplements. But bear in mind that will only cover federal packages. Our site will cover state and the 2 local governments that most of our clients fall within, which is the Sunshine Coast and the Moreton Bay region. So that's it from my perspective. I know we had to do a really quick speed version, but does anybody have any questions?
Hi Di, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Hi Susan, how are you going?
Good, how are you? You
Good,
might feel like, Di, you've actually got about 13 people on.
Oh, do I? I can only see 5 of you. I'm sorry for the rest of you that I've ignored.
So I have 2 quick questions just about the Entrepreneurs Program. You said it's a minimum of 3 years. What the business has to be operational for? Is there a maximum?
No. So that's this one here. There is no maximum period. As long as you've been trading for 3 years, that's fine.
Okay, great. And the women's founder one what was the criteria around length in business for that?
It doesn't actually state in the detailed guidelines. It just says startup. So what I would suggest with the guidelines on that, download them, have a look for yourself. I've got them here somewhere. I was looking at them this morning. They are quite detailed guidelines for this one. It's a federal program. I would suggest, and this is something that I always do myself, if I have a query such as that I can't find answered in the detailed guidelines, there is always a contact number for the various government area that's handling this particular grant program, and it might be a 1300 number, but you ring the 1300 number, ask to be put through to the people in charge of the department in charge of the Female Founders Grant, ask them your specific question, and then ask for them to email you the response, because it's really handy to have the response in writing for anything that's not contained within the detailed guidelines. So that was a question that I was planning on also emailing to ask. So whoever asked that, it's a great question, and it's something that's not addressed in the detailed criteria at the moment. It just says startup, but it doesn't define what's classified as a startup. You know, how many years do you have to have been trading for, or, you know, does it have to be in your first 2 years, for example? It doesn't actually display or just explain what the startup is actually classified as. No? Okay.
Actually, can we get a copy of the slides, or some information there?
Absolutely. What I can do is, to everybody that's enrolled, I can send you a copy of the PowerPoints. I will also send you links to our COVID resource page and a great summary that we have done that's about 47 pages on the various stimulus support packages that are available. I'll also send that through to everyone as well, because it lists the things that we didn't touch on today, such as the individual benefits and, accessing superannuation, that sort of thing as well. So this one will cover both the business and individual situations. So I'll make sure that I email everybody a copy of that as well.
That'd be fantastic. Thanks.
No problem. So what I would like to do is just remind everyone, when we get to the other side of this and you're preparing to get your business ready for grants, follow the checklist. So strategic business plan is the foundation on which any application is based, and you need to be preparing your business for grant success now, not when you find out a program's open. Practical tip number 2, always review the detailed application guidelines to determine your business and your project eligibility. So there's 2 eligibility sets of criteria you need to be familiar with. Always read those guidelines, and if you're not sure whether a particular expense on a project is included, have a look at what won't be funded. And if you're unsure, call the office and ask them to email you their response. Any application, it's really critical that you're mapping to the detailed grant criteria. And the assessment criteria usually comes down to 2 things, jobs and growth. So you've got to be able to prove the revenue growth, prove the direct and indirect job growth that flows from you undertaking this project. Check the detail, make sure that you've got all of the support documentation and that you upload it before you click that final submit button. And talk to your advisors, get knowledge about the different grant programs that are available. Sign up to RDA websites and newsletters, the Caloundra Chamber newsletters, because they will be notifying you when things open. But again, to find out what's coming before it opens, I always start with Grants Hub, and I look at the budgets and the small business strategies when they're released from both a state and federal perspective. And finally, and most importantly, monitor the impact of the project on your cash flow, because your grant inflows are not going to match your grant outflows. So thank you all for attending today. I hope you found it useful. Happy to stay on for a few more minutes if you've got any specific questions you would like to ask. Otherwise, I wish everyone the best and good luck with, us all staying safe and sane over the next couple of months. I think it's certainly a difficult, challenging time for individuals and businesses, and I wish you all well. Thank you
so much. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a great
Thanks,
day.
guys.
See ya.
Thank you.